Let me make sure that I'm. Oh, we're live. Or we should be. Yeah. Okay. We're live. Now our faces have transitioned to the forefront. All right. Oh, do you want to type an announcement in the announcement channel?
Oh yeah. Sure.
Right. This is the pre-show for all of. I'm the only viewer right now, so it's not a deal. But if somebody else shows up, wants to pre-show with us, that's cool too.
We are doing the Derpies, right?
Yes.
Okay. And let's publish.
Apparently, we're opposite games done quick, which is probably not a great thing for us to be. But
Fair enough.
yeah, whatever. All right, did you publish it? Yes.
Yes, it is
All right.
published. You should be good to go.
All right. Well, in that case, hello and welcome to some Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy. Mango, I was admiring your baby face. I feel like it's been a long time since I've seen you without a beard.
Yeah, no, I mean we didn't comment on it last time, but I shaved off just this part, and I had the mutton chops in the last broadcast, if you remember, and I was like, and it was mostly just to kind of freak out my parents and my brother who I saw over the holidays. But I was like, I can't be a real person with this, so I shaved it all off, and so it's slowly growing back in. But anyway, today we're going to do the Derpies, our long-running series where we talk about the best stuff we did this year. But before we do that, buddy, you want to tell folks at home what it is we do on this podcast? Sorry.
On this podcast, we talk about games. The best part about this is that I also decided to, I guess, swallow an ice cube as soon as you pitched it back to me. Yes, so we like to talk about games, but we also like to talk about movies and television shows. So there's a lot of ground that the Derpies can cover. If you haven't been to the Derpies before, don't worry. This is everybody's first Derpies sometime, right? The way the Derpies work is one of us will create a category and award that award to something, right? Category can be anything. It can be normal stuff. Oh, what was your favorite movie of the year? It can be out there bonkers stuff like what was your favorite side character in an RPG this year? And then the other person has to create their award on the spot. So part of it is like live, I guess.
Yeah, we also always start with our games of the year, unlike those other gaming shows which make you wait till the end.
Correct.
For the past 2 years, we've been dividing it up into best game as game, best game as sport, and best game as art. So let's start with best game as game, I guess. Do you want to go first?
Wait. We have 3 categories: best game as game, best game as sport, best game as art.
Yeah, we've been doing this. This is our 3rd year doing it, buddy.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I have no memory of this, but okay.
So it started because we had so to be fair, this is my doing because I gave the first year it was like God of War, Obra Dinn, and then I forget what the sport game was, but I wanted to divide it up because Obra Dinn I thought was very impressive, but God of War was also very impressive. So we could just not do that. We could just go back to single game of the year. Your call. We do what we want here.
You know what? I think I want to do. I'm fine with this. So my game of the year is obvious. Anyone who has been paying attention to the podcast over the last year can absolutely call this one. I will call this. It is truly a game of the year in the sense that it is both a fusion of the sports side and a fusion of the art side. Mine is World of Warcraft Shadowlands, right? It's actually a little more broad than that. I would want to almost back that up and say that the 8.3 patch all the way into this. But on the sports side of it, there's just no amount to how much I enjoyed Mythic Plus this in this game and in this expansion, it has very much become the like league thing that we used to do, where everyone is online at the end of a day, and we break off into 5-man groups, cycling people in and out, doing these mythic plus kind of speed runs of World of Warcraft dungeons. That like the other pieces of it, raiding is also something I do a little bit, but it's mostly just to kind of like hang out and get gear. I was never like very crazy about raiding when it came to this expansion, and also like PvP stuff. I was never into like the PvP side of things. Um, but then I would also say that like I am legitimately really interested and invested in like the WoW storyline. Part of this is obviously that I'm like a WoW peer, so like I'm really connected to that lore. But I am really just like interested to see where they kind of like go from here. One of the neat advents of kind of the end of BFA and Shadowlands has been that like we have sort of seen it all. Most of sort of like the big name, sort of like foreshadowed bad guys have all kind of come and gone. We have defeated the Legion, right? We have kind of cleared out the old god threat. We have visited both Zandalar and Kultiris, these like famously uncovered pieces of Azeroth. And so it feels like kind of everything that comes next is all very like brand new. We're kind of establishing new lore rather than going back and sort of like clipping off old lore. Now that is always going to be a thing, even in the new lore. We're going back and we're dealing with people like Kael'thas who have a long history in the Warcraft universe, etc. From sort of like an artistic perspective, I'm like incredibly interested in like the narrative design and the narrative direction of all things World of Warcraft. So that is my easiest game of the year award. What's yours?
Mine, and this is probably also not surprising to anyone, but mine is Hades, which I spent a lot of time with in after 1.0 for it dropped in like in August, I want to say. Just to me, it was the kind of perfect blending of like really solid, tight feeling action, and interesting story mechanics. Right, like I am long been a fan of Supergiant games. And this is the first game that has felt like a true sequel to my favorite game of all time, Bastion. And by true sequel, it's not as like Bastion 2 or anything, but their games in between, which have also been fun, were Transistor and Pyre. But those games were like very different, right? Like Pyre's basically like a weird fantasy basketball game, and Transistor's kind of like a active turn-based game. They all have kind of like those cool story elements that the Supergiant's so good at, and also like the art direction and the voice direction. Logan Cunningham's the famous voice act, or the most famous member of the voice acting crew, because he does all the deep. He was Rux in Bastion. Those are in all of those games, but I think what they're really exceptional at is making really good feeling combat, and Hades really nails that. Right, Bastion really nailed it, and Hades really nails that. There's a lot of cool upgrade paths with it. I think it adapts well to kind of the rogue light structure. It also has some neat new takes on that kind of on that kind of thing. But so something they have always done with these games is tried to make them like playable beyond kind of like their storyline, right? Like you can go back and add difficulty modifiers to Bastion to play it at a harder level. But I always found those like not super compelling. But Hades, by nature of being a roguelite, right? Like it's just like it's a very cool and natural fit, right? Like you are incentivized to keep playing the game because that's kind of what the game wants you to do, if that makes sense. And like it doesn't put a lot of like the neat story progression. Like there's some that's um behind playing it, like playing the game to a certain level. Like you have to get to the end of a run, and you have to do it many times to get to the ending of the storyline. But it's not dependent on ramping up the difficulty. But you can if you want to while you're doing that, and that's much more compelling to me personally. And so just that, like just the combination of the really excellently told story, with the great Greek motifs combined with the really excellent combat makes it an easy game of the year pick for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I absolutely would have guessed Hades if I had like put the money down, I guess, beforehand. Okay, so to do our next piece, let's do, I guess, games as sport next. This one also might be pretty telegraphed, especially if you're a longtime listener, because I talked about this game a lot in the middle of the year. But for me, the game as sport would have to go to Killing Floor 2, which I played about 100 hours of in the middle of this year. Um, it's really weird to me thinking about it on this level, because like I don't really necessarily think of like PvE shooters as like sport, right? But the way that we were engaging with that game, in the same way that I was engaging in like Mythic Plus this way, was just like, we're all on, let's load up Killing Floor and play a bunch of matches for 3 or 4 hours at the end of our day, kind of like unwind sort of thing. And we did really get into it as sort of a um as a I don't even know how to explain it. I guess this competitive experience, but like we're kind of competing against ourselves and like the benchmarks. It's like we're trying to like beat the computer's time trials in Mario Kart or whatever. Um, we fell off Killing Floor pretty hard. We kind of fell off of Killing Floor and then took that same kind of generalized apparatus and shifted it over into Warcraft. Um, but I actually have a lot of love for Killing Floor, and I could absolutely see myself like going back and kind of like dipping into the well. It really hit on sort of like a visceral and playable combat that I haven't seen, like FPS combat that I haven't really seen since Payday 2. Everything pales in comparison to Payday 2 when it comes to sort of the way the missions are built out. I've always loved that Payday really wants you to focus on shifting your objective every, 45 seconds or a minute, so you're constantly kind of like reorienting yourself and your squad to doing a new task. And Killing Floor, you're really just killing guys over and over and over again. But the actual gunplay and the mechanics of like leveling up and purchasing weapons and how you kind of approach the objective strategically is actually much deeper, I think, in Killing Floor, and um to its benefit, right? You can have people who focus on killing lots of little dudes, right? Kind of area of effect, doing like flamethrower demolitionist sort of stuff. You can have people who are snipers or gunslingers, right? Who are built on, I'm going to take out like the most hardcore dangerous monsters, Zeds, whatever they're called, for the team. You can have people who are going to tank the damage, like the berserkers or SWAT. You can have people who are going to kind of be in that support role, right? And so that's something that that's sort of like the team based, everyone has their own role to fill combat. That's just, I don't know, that's just a lot of fun. So congratulations, Killing Floor 2, a game from 6 years ago that I just finally played for the first time, for this award.
Yeah. Um, and I'm going to give mine to Apex Legends, which is a game that I've played a ton of this year, in the most recent season. Not super recently, but just they keep updating that game, right? Like a lot of these kind of live service games. But it is always crazy to me, like how compelling the kind of the loop is, and just how clean that game is, right? Like there's a handful now of these kind of games, of these battle royale games that have kind of like risen to the top, right? And I don't play Fortnite, but I've played Apex and Warzone, and Warzone does some neat stuff, but ultimately I think like it is best considered as kind of like a Call of Duty game first, and a BR second, and it's good for what it is, but I am really compelled by kind of the Apex model, right? They've added some cool new characters, and a cool new map, right? Like the kind of what is it? It's like a city in the sky. I think it's supposed to be kind of the society that is watching the Apex game when it is happening in universe. The lore is a little fuzzy there for me, but um, it feels really clean. It's really fast, in terms of not necessarily in terms of how fast the game goes, but like the pace of combat, right? Like intentionally, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds is a more slow plotting game because it's supposed to be a little bit more tactical. Whereas Apex Legends is supposed to be a little bit more hyper, more kind of like I want to say almost like that Quake kind of uh, area. And it's like I said, it's super compelling, super fun to just shoot some people. And they're keeping they keep it entertaining, and so I think it gets that award from me. All right. And just to kind of switch it back so that I'll take first on this next one. Games as art. Um, so this is a game I played a lot in the middle of the year, and I'm specifically calling it out for its art aspect. I'm going to do this a little bit. I'm going to give it to Ghost of Tsushima, which is one of the most beautiful games I have played in a long time. Um, and this is mostly on kind of like the presentation, the story, the visuals, the music, right? Like all those kind of like I'm gonna say artsy pieces. This isn't like say Obra Dinn a couple of years ago, where I was giving it to it for like kind of like a game as kind of like a unique fixture. But this is as kind of like its theming, and it's kind of like ways of like evoking the old samurai films, like pretty intentionally, but pretty well. Um, uh, it is just so just little touches, right? Like instead of following markers, you follow like the wind or a bird to your different objectives. Um, the reason this is getting Game of the Year's art is because the combat is fun, but it's kind of like um, kind of standard, right? Like it's like it reminds me of basically one of kind of like the Ubi Tower game type things. There's no towers, but that basically same kind of concept. But without but like the prettiest version of that you've ever seen, right? So, uh, it's well, I found it good, but like, uh, but not super impressive in the gameplay department. In the kind of looks department, it just is outstanding, and also in kind of a lot of the emotional beats. The end of that game was one of the biggest emotional impacts I've gotten from a game recently. Just kind of like I won't spoil it for anybody, but like just kind of like it's fairly typical samurai themes, but there's a little bit of subversion there too, or there can be if you want there to be. Um, and it's just a super beautiful, super captivating game. So that's my game of the year's art is Ghost of Tsushima.
Well, it's funny that you bring up like the Ubisoft Tower game because I had a bit of like a Ubisoft renaissance myself. I played a bunch of like I went back, I replayed Far Cry 5 and then Far Cry New Dawn, which was sort of like the Fallout-esque sequel to Far Cry 5. And I played some Assassin's Creed games. And my game of the year for art, I want to give to Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is a little bit different than we would normally think of, sort of like games as art. And I want to like add this context because I think it matters. When I was playing Valhalla, we were like two-ish, like a week and a half out from Shadowlands being released, and I was like unbearably hyped. Right, I was so ready to do the next the next WoW expansion. And I was in this weird place of the thing I want to do is play the new WoW expansion. The only thing I can play that's like that now is BFA, right? But there's nothing to do in BFA because it's the end of the expansion. 2 weeks from now, all my gear is going to reset, all the other, et cetera, et cetera. And what I did was I picked up Assassin's Creed Valhalla because it came out that week. People on my Twitter were talking about it. I was like, you know what, fine. And the reason that it really nailed it for me this year, and the reason that I want to give it like this specific award, is to actually kind of like highlight something that we don't always like talk about when it comes to sort of like the artistic nature of these games and like their narratives. Right, I was not hit in a very profound or compelling or insightful place with this game. This was not the second coming of like Mutazione, right? A game I worked on. I love that game dearly. Is very emotionally affecting. Playing it through all the way, I was really a part of that story, and I was really invested in like the drama and the tension of those characters. Assassin's Creed Valhalla really didn't hit that for me. What it hit was the Skyrim feel, right? It created a world, and it asked me, hey, do you believe in this world? Can you get lost in it? Can you be sort of like immersed in the episodic nature of the storytelling, right? Kind of linked with your major character and coming in and out of like coming in and out of some like major plot threads, but generally speaking, each sort of area is its own sort of episode to the adventure. And I really fell head over heels for that. Right, I never even beat the game. I don't know how it ends. It could end in a number of different ways. There's plenty of stuff that got set up in it, but what really got me was how interested and invested I got in that journey, right? In just kind of going to a new area, figuring out what is wrong in the local, like the local population. Like, oh, a bunch of whatevers have taken over this fort and we got to take it back. Oh, we represent this king and you got to train up his little king son, right? Oh, you show up and the guy that you're supposed to meet is murdered and you have to solve a big murder mystery. And each one of those like little adventures just like grabbed me. It took me, a day ish to to finish it, and I didn't really need anything more out of Assassin's Creed Valhalla than that. Obviously, Shadowlands dropped, and I dropped Valhalla without a second thought. But it was a really great ride for the time. And this is this is the kind of game that I feel like I would overlook in other years. So I want to highlight it. I want to highlight it here.
Awesome. Yeah. Excellent.
Okay, so to continue right along, I want to talk about my movie of the year, which is a really weird one because theaters have been closed for 9 months. I have barely seen any movies this year. It feels like, or actually, that's not true. I've seen plenty of movies, probably more movies than ever, because I'm at home all the time and all I'm doing is like sitting in my computer watching shit. But when it comes to new movies that came out in 2020, there are not that many of them, right? There's a couple of like the big blowout blockbusters from the very early year that we talked about, right? Birds of Prey is one. There's a couple of the ones that came out in the middle of the year. Tenet, which I never actually saw. Wonder Woman just came out at the end of the year. Soul, that Pixar movie. I think Mulan also came out this year, though I did not see that as well. And the one that I had when I was looking over, I was like scrolling through. I was looking at one of the movies that came out in 2020. Of all the ones that I saw, the one that I immediately like jumped out at me, and I was like, oh, that one. It's that one. Is Greyhound. This movie came out in July of 2020, and it stars Tom Hanks. It's the movie about a captain of a submarine hunting destroyer in World War II, which I talked about at the time on the podcast. What a great premise for a film, right? We've seen a million World War II movies, even naval World War II movies, right? And those are like great or whatever. But like the Battle of the Atlantic that was going on between Allied, you know, uh, ships on top of the ocean and the German U-boats beneath the waves, right? It's like incredibly compelling drama. So good. And this movie just capitalized on everything in there. I don't know that I'm going to see it again. Maybe I will in that same sort of way that like I'll revisit Doctor Strange every once in a while. It's just like it's a good ride. But it's so simple. It's so straightforward. The drama is palpable. The tension is electric. And it rides or dies in 90 minutes. Like, what else could I possibly want? So I wanted to highlight Greyhound for sure. Kind of in the same vein as Assassin's Creed Valhalla. This is not the most profound movie, not the movie that made me think the most or whatever. But it was just a really great ride for the time. And yeah.
Absolutely fair. And I'm just kind of like looking through because as similar to you, I also didn't watch it's been everything's been closed. I actually did see Tenet again with on because it released on streaming. I watched it on Apple Movies with my brother. But I'm going to pick something that's technically came out this year, which is we talked about it, Alexander Hamilton, or Hamilton, I guess.
Oh, yeah.
Or rather, the movie version came out this year, even though the Broadway play's been going for a while. But part of this, I'll admit, is just kind of like there's not a lot of movies that came out this year that I can talk about, and I think Tenet was Tenet. We should talk about it at some point whenever you get around to seeing it. But there's one thing I saw this year that has kind of dominated my my earworms. Like what has been playing in my head? What have I been listening to? And that's the Hamilton soundtrack. And it's super well done. We talked about the things that we variously had problems with it, but it's still a very cool piece of Americana, I guess is the way to put it. An interesting kind of take on the American myth. In a lot of cool ways, actually. Like it's got a lot there. And compare it to what was 1776, the other movie we watched to pair with it.
Yes, we watched 1776 with it. Oh my god.
Yeah, which is and that movie was also not super accurate, but it was interesting in its own ways. But I just like Hamilton's kind of just all the parts of it kind of like and maybe this is just new to me, but like I've not seen a lot of Broadway plays where like where in kind of like that style where like the musicals I'm used to are kind of a little bit more of the classical style, right? Like the Music Man or Annie or something like that.
Like, there's a certain amount of verisimilitude
Y-
to the proceedings, right? Hamilton is very, like, metaphorical. It
Yeah,
wants to show you a couple of people with red coats, and you get the sense there's an army there, whereas Annie always has developments like that happening. "Oh, like, this is just off stage," right?
yeah.
We are in the place that we are in. Yeah, I get
And
that for sure.
and part of that too. What I'm getting at is also like it's it's not classical music, but like the musicals I'm used to are like this kind of like mid-century American sound, right? Like 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 something that
Oh, like, yeah, like a big band musical.
yeah,
Definitely, right? My Fair
big band.
Lady.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
looking for.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, Hamilton's very hip hop inspired, which is uh, something that I hadn't seen a lot of, and I've seen some other jukebox musicals, but uh, I thought Hamilton did it best, at least for the things for this year. So yeah, um, pushing it into the next category, which will be for me, and I'm going to say best new entry in a series. I'm going to give that to Crusader Kings 3. Part of my inspiration for picking this topic is beyond being an excellent game, which Crusader Kings 3 is. It was in kind of like my personal running for game of the year. Is that as a sequel, right? Like it does a lot of things right. It takes a lot of what was cool and great about Crusader Kings 2 and expands upon it and makes it better, and also does a lot of things to kind of make the gaming experience better, right? Crusader Kings 3 is an infinitely more approachable game than Crusader Kings 2, and I think that's really a triumph, kind of bringing like Crusader Kings 2 kind of has like this meme status is like the I think one of the categories that Crusader Kings 3 is up for in the Steam Awards is best game you suck at. And Crusader Kings 2 has a lot of that, but a lot of that just kind of rides on the fact that it's inscrutable. Right? Like you don't understand how things work. You kind of have to watch like 10 hours of video tutorials to really understand it. Crusader Kings 3 strips a lot of that away. It's much easier to step up and kind of like look at what's happening and understand what's happening. It also does a lot of kind of, I'm going to call quality of life, although it's not quite right. A lot of things that were in Crusader Kings 2 were like, oh, there's like a 15% chance of this happening any given year. And it's like, well, that could be a year. That could be, 30 in game, whereas in this version they've kind of like amortized that out a bit, right? It's like, well, if it's a 15% chance, it'll probably like instead of being a 50% chance, it'll be what that's like on average like 7 years or whatever. They'll just say it takes 7 years, and then like you might get an event that speeds it up or an event that slows it down, which I think is a much better way to do things. On top of that, it's got some nice graphical upgrades. It's also something that it did that I want to highlight is while it did take some features out of like there aren't all the features that were in Crusader Kings 2, it did leave a lot in. So a lot of kind of the stuff that we got in, like Paradox is kind of legendary for the amount of DLC they'll put into a game. But Crusader Kings 3 did not take absolutely everything out. It left a lot of kind of like some of like the religious stuff and some of kind of like the basic ways to interact with things that we had gotten used to from Crusader Kings 2 survived the survive the transfer to Crusader Kings 3, and so I think that's very, excuse me, it was just really well done. So yeah, I'm gonna give best new entry in a series to Crusader Kings 3.
Okay, I guess I will take this a little at its word. Um, for me, the best new entry in a series this year is the fifth season of Better Call Saul, which came out earlier this year, and we talked about on this podcast, right?
We did.
I have long been of the opinion Better Call Saul is the best television that you can watch right now, right? It is the best show on television. It has been the best show on television since its first season, right? And it constantly, always always surprises me how compelling I find like the drama and what takes place over the course of any individual episode, both from sort of like an individual character level and on the kind of like a wider, more kind of grand and thematic level. In a way, I felt like Breaking Bad was kind of asking these like big questions about morality in sort of broad terms, whereas what I love about Better Call Saul is it gets so like individually specific, and in the ways that it challenges its characters in those individually specific ways, right? So for instance, Mike's behavior over the course of the series, right, as he sort of descends into, as a cop, right, who is descending deeper and deeper into kind of like a criminal life, and the things that he does and the reason that he does them, you can tell that he thinks that he's doing the right thing. He does these things because they are good, right? um but what that good means is kind of like whittled away and chipped at and tested, and sometimes he withstands the test and sometimes he kind of fails. Famously, at the end of the fourth season, right, spoilers are a little bit, he commits his first like murder for hire murder, and it's because he was put with two principles up against one another, right? Is his will to finish the job, to do the job that he was hired to do, greater than his will to not kill someone? We've seen him go through these elaborate lengths, right, to avoid killing someone before. And now it is quite simply his duty to kill that person. And that question is just like so compelling to me. In the fifth season, obviously, that question revolves quite a lot around Saul. Saul is someone that he kind of up brought into this world, and he has this responsibility for Saul, for Jimmy, however you want to look at it, for him being that close to all of this stuff. And so all of those questions are now kind of like bringing these two central characters, which have sort of acted a little bit as kind of like binary nodes, right? You kind of have Mike's story on this side, Saul's story on this side. They're not touching a lot, but they do interact or whatever. Um, this is the season where they really comes to head, because now Mike is clearly capable. He is in the major leagues, right? He is batting 1,000 and doing really well for himself. Saul has been dragged up into that level by Mike to a certain extent, and now you have this responsibility, and now he has this responsibility on his shoulders. How is he going to handle and deal with, right, that responsibility, which kind of comes to a head in the way that the season sort of culminates with, like, I would say, climactic episode of them being lost in the desert, even if it is not technically the climax or the climactic episode. As always, Rhea Seahorn on the opposite end, right, does a fantastic job. Probably the best actor on television, I would say. I think that she embodies Kim in a way that I haven't sort of like seen a character go that deep since like maybe early Game of Thrones, with like Peter Dinklage. Like, I kind of think Peter Dinklage sort of fell off a little bit over the course of Game of Thrones run, but I don't know. It's just like she's amazing at it. She's so good. So I think that show is so good, and it is the latest episode, or I'm sorry, it's the latest entry in the long running series. So I guess that would be my answer, which puts me in a little bit of an awkward question because I was going to ask like best TV series. Um, but now I can't, because that would have been Better Call Saul. How about this? Best TV that you watched this year, right? And for me, I just want to take a second to sort of highlight The Sopranos. I've talked about it a little bit, and I do think that we should do a cast on it a little bit later down the line. But I've done a lot over the course of the last 2 years to sort of like build up my bona fides in a way where I want to go back and sort of see like what TV are people saying is the most important? Like, what should I be keeping up with, right? There's the very current answers to that question, which is stuff like, um, you know, uh, The Mandalorian or The Boys, right? Which are shows that are coming out kind of like right now. But I think the foundation of a lot of this stuff can be seen in those early HBO shows, of which I watched Sex and the City, which is a thing, and of course The Sopranos. The Sopranos really surprised me. I was expecting it to be a little bit more grim, a little bit more. Well, actually, grim is the wrong word. It is bleak. That is a mean show with it thinks very little of people and humanity, right? But what I expected was sort of like a mob show, right? In the vein of Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad, where the core drama is about this life of crime, right? That Tony Soprano is leaving. But frankly, that's very rarely the case. The core drama in most episodes is very character driven. It's very family driven, where it sort of feels like Skylar is sort of the perpetual B plot, right? Skylar and Walter Jr. in Breaking Bad are sort of like the B plot compared to Walter and Gus, for instance, right? In this one, Tony's family really is the A plot almost entirely all the way through the series. It does a really great job of showing events in a way that is both plausible and surprising in it's kind of hard to explain without like actually getting into the details. There's a number of like moments where I was really expecting the show to zig and it zagged, right? And it had a real understanding of audience expectations in that sense. And even though it kept hitting me with these kind of like anticlimaxes, I almost always came away from them saying like, you know what? I think that's a better version of events than the version that I was expecting, right? I was expecting this to be a shootout and it turns out it wasn't. And that was just like really satisfying. That's just really interesting. The Sopranos absolutely shows its age. I think it is worse than these shows that are better, cleaner, slicker, more sort of like tense and dramatic. But as a kind of iconic entry, you can really see that it is the building block on which a lot of these other sorts of things follow in its footsteps. So that's it. That's my favorite show that I saw this year.
Yep. I mean, I'm gonna have to give it to Saul, because it might be like it definitely deserves it, but it might be the only show I've seen this year. Did Watchmen come out this year?
Hmm.
Um, all right. Well, it's not going to Watchmen. Which,
Yeah, I mean, we ended pretty sourly on Watchmen, I
yeah.
guess. But
Um,
yeah, oh, so you haven't seen the new Sopranos, or I'm sorry, the new Mandalorian?
no, I have not. I
Okay,
don't watch a lot of television. I also don't like.
fair enough.
Yeah.
Oh, we
Um,
also never did the Boku no Hero Academia season, which
yeah.
I assume
It
is ended by now.
it might still be on, like, anime's weird. So
Yeah, that's true.
and we never did any of the shows that you wanted to do, which
Oh
is
yeah, we owe a Young Justice episode because we did Boku no Hero, and I
yeah.
wanted to compare it to Young Justice, and
Right.
then we never got around to it.
Yeah, I mean, it took us a year to get to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so
That's next year, I guess. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, so for all the reasons you said, right? Better Call Saul is fantastic. I think Bob Odenkirk is a great actor. I'm looking forward. He's got a new movie coming out, doesn't he?
Hmm.
Um, I think that just kind of like, so the other side of this, right, is like, for me, is like I wasn't really in kind of the fifth season. But Saul and Charlie's relationship is something that really spoke to me. Um, just like the brother stuff. I also think that like from like legal stuff isn't super forefronted, but it's something that's personally interesting to me. It's a good lawyer show. From all the lawyers that I have heard talk about it, is it is um,
It is a more true to form lawyer show than I feel like so many of these
yeah.
lawyer shows are. Like I think it was Legal Eagle who talked about this. Like the first episode of Better Call Saul focusing on him as a public defender is no one shows that stuff, but like that is absolutely what it is like.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's part of it, right? Like, it is a very gritty kind of like show about bad people, and public defenders often get like are often not, they are overstressed and under resourced, right?
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of kind of like crapping on them, right? The guys who are actually public defenders, like that. I don't know, is his name Ned? Yeah, I feel like his name wants to be Ned, the public defender that he always interacts with.
Oh, he's not a public defender. He's a DA.
Oh, you're right.
He's
He's a
like the
DA.
one. He's the one DA, and he always bribes him with food. I love that guy. And what a great name for him, Ned. Absolutely perfect name.
Uh, Yeah, but yeah. So I'm gonna give it to Better Call Saul. I don't have a lot to say about it, or a lot more to add to it, since you talked about it so convincingly.
Fair
Um,
enough.
Although the chat asks, that it's not Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's
Okay, I have been really enjoying. We'll talk about this in the back half of the show. I have really been enjoying Yu-Gi-Oh, and I have lots of thoughts about Yu-Gi-Oh. that I have thoughts about Yu-Gi-Oh. We'll talk about that.
All right. And so okay, so next category, um, more kind of visual media. Best YouTube essayist, and I'm going to give it to Action Button Reviews / Tim Rogers. Um, it's he. I've talked about this before. I've gushed about him before, right? Like he did like a 3 hour Doom review and a 3 hour. What was this second one he did? Um, that I watched Pac-Man, Pac-Man review, and it's and most recently, and this dropped like 3 days ago, maybe he did a 6 hour review of Tokimeki Memorial, which is a game that I didn't know about before I saw it, which is a dating sim by Konami. And the way he puts it is like it wasn't the first dating sim, but it's the one that kind of like defined it as a genre in the same kind of way that like Super Mario Brothers wasn't the first platformer, but it's the one that kind of defined it as a genre.
Hmm.
He just goes into an insane amount of detail. That part of the reason why that one's 6 hours is because he has two, not moment by moment playthroughs, but like two basically full playthroughs in it, which comprise his first and his 14th playthrough of it. His dedication to his craft is just so exceptional. He like plays like he puts hours and hours and hours into playing all the variations of the game. I think for the Doom one, he played for at least a little while every version of Doom that he could get his hands on. Um, and he so any other YouTube SES, at least the ones that I'm familiar with, would take one aspect of what he does and do it really well and do it in like half an hour. But he does all of them over 3 hours, right? And what I mean by this is like he'll talk about the cultural moment that the game belongs in. He'll talk about what its lasting effects on games in the future were, right? Like he'll talk about like, how you can see pieces of it in other ways. He'll talk about the industry stuff around it, right? Like Iga, who is most famous for doing Castlevania Symphony of the Night, did writing on Tokimeki Memorial. He'll talk about kind of the mechanics of the game and why they work well, right? Like which is like something that you expect from say like Game Maker's Toolkit. And then he'll also talk about like the deeper kind of like literary analysis type stuff. Like this is the kind of stuff that we do sometimes, right? Like the kind of like what is the kind of true meaning of this? Like what is kind of the message that you can pull from the mechanics of the game as well as kind of the story of the game, or like what's relevant there. So and they're just so jam packed and they're so well done, right? Like I think he filmed I know he filmed some of his segments on like Red Cam, right? Like it's got like super high production value. He's got a kind of very melodic way of speaking that kind of just does that grabs you, or at least grabs me, right? And like it's entertaining as well. So that's been some of the best time I've spent this year is watching the Action Button review stuff. So
I need to watch it. You linked me the 6 hour Action Button reviews for Tokimeki Memorial, and I have yet to watch it, but I really want to. For me, this goes to, and I have advocated that we do an episode on this, so the time sort of passed a little bit. Patrick H. Willems, which I feel really glad I get to kind of highlight this. Patrick H. Willems is a YouTube content creator who started out doing like he's like a true director who's doing like fan videos. He did like what if Wes Morrison did the X-Men, right? It's like a parody kind of video or whatever. And he made one video essay like 4 years ago that blew up, right? 3 million views overnight kind of thing. Um Ever since then, he more or less transitioned his channel into a video essayist channel, but like he also has included this overarching narrative where like there's sort of a narrative framing device at the beginning and end of each episode of who he's talking to, where, like what he's doing. And a lot of the times that framing device is sort of like a reflection on the episode itself. So, for instance, the framing device for an episode about music biopics, which we've talked about in the past. We talked about Walk Hard recently, right? In that episode, the framing device is that Patrick follows the music biopic formula, but as like a YouTube video essayist, right? So he starts taking drugs and like staying up and editing YouTube videos, and then he goes to rehab for the drugs that he took to edit the YouTube videos, that kind of thing. In the middle of this year, Patrick had a run where basically he went to his parents' house over like one weekend, brought like a like a small suitcase, and over that weekend New York City's lockdown went into effect, right, for quarantine. And he was like, well, I'm already at my parents' house, I guess I should just stay here. And he stayed there for the next 5 months. And during that time, the videos that he created were all part of the talk show format, where every episode was he showed up, he was standing behind a desk, and it was as if he was doing a talk show. The talk show always had a different name or whatever, right? And he had like a backdrop that was like a canvas of like New York City, but it would like fall down and stuff. At first, the desk he was at was actually just a dresser, so his legs didn't really like fit under it, and you can kind of see like over time it sort of like evolved. And the talk show series of episodes are insanely funny, insanely insightful, just like an absolute ride, culminating in what I would say to be uh the TCM Wine Club episode, where he orders like the TCM Wine Club package, which is like an $800 a month subscription service where you watch like classic movies and also drink the wine that they have paired with those, like with those classic movies. And you just like watch as he slowly, and obviously it's all pretend, right? Like he's
Yeah.
not actually getting like sloshed or whatever. But as like the weight of quarantine is sort of like brutalizing him, he's drinking more and more and watching these classic movies. And the best thing is that the very end of the talk show, he does an episode on time loop movies, right? So Palm Spring is one that came out this year. Groundhog Day is the very famous time loop movie. There's a bunch of these, right, where people, Edge of Tomorrow, right, is the kind of the action movie version of this, where people re-experience the same events in a time loop over and over again, where he time loops himself in the talk show, going through the different iterations of the talk show. And just like that chunk of time is like the best video essay that ever video essayed, as far as I'm concerned, right? Where it packs profundity and insight. It's funny and really compelling, and the way that it like links episode to episode with kind of this continuity, I don't know, it just feels great. It just feels like great to watch. And I think, he really hit it out of the park, which I feel good about, because like, I may not have watched a ton of TV, I may not have watched a ton of movies, I didn't play a ton of games, right? But I did consume a lot of YouTube media, and the top among, I am very confident in saying that yes, in fact, the top among them was Patrick H. Willems. Good job, you nailed it.
Awesome. Well, I believe
Okay,
it's your category. Yeah.
it is my category, and I was gonna do that one, so I gotta think. Okay, here's one. Okay, what is your favorite specific like gaming moment? Not like an overarching moment, right? But like something that you did, or you figured out, or you executed on in a
Mm.
mechanics way, or maybe like a story way, um, that you just found to be sort of like endlessly satisfying and fun. This is an easy one for me because it has essentially just happened. Um, but I want to talk about it because this is the world we live in. I have a podcast. I get to talk about this stuff. Okay, so in World of Warcraft, my spec plays in like a particular way, and I've played a lot of iterations of this spec. I've been playing Arms Warrior since 2010, since actually longer than that, since 2008. So since Wrath of the Lich King dropped, I've been playing Arms Warrior more or less off and on. But every single expansion I have touched the class, and I've really gotten into sort of like what it is and how it works, right? And one of the things that we talked about in kind of earlier episodes was this whole fear of like covenant, which covenant is best, which covenant is worst. Well, it turns out the covenant that I went on Bairn, Necrolords, is the worst covenant for a warrior, right? Most warriors are going Venthyr because the ability condemn replaces execute. You just have more execute uptime. You're doing crazy execute things. It's very fun. It's very satisfying. I played with execute for a while. I have a warrior that does have condemn, and it is a legitimately amazing ability that is incredibly fun to play with. But so here I am. I'm on Baron, and I am using Conqueror's Banner, right, which is a 3-minute cooldown, which is a pretty hefty cooldown, and it is like a group buff. It gives everybody 20% health. It gives two other people 20% health, and it gives two other people at 10% extra critical strike chance. The thing that satisfies me about all of this is that even though I have like the worst covenant, even though I'm not playing the meta build, which right now is um, like Dreadnought, it relies on using an ability called Overpower. I've found a way to be very successful with my like Necrolord's Arms Warriors, where I'm putting out not only like very good damage, but like high level, high parsing, damage, right? And so it has kind of revealed to me that some of the things that we've talked about when it comes to sort of like balance or whatever, there is a real difference between optimization and viability, right? And that if you don't go the recommended route, if you go this other route, you do have real paths to success, right? And you have real paths to be putting out kind of like aggressively good numbers. Something that I did early in the expansion was I decided I'm not going to go this dreadnought build, because when I plant Conqueror's Banner, right, I want to be spending rage on my abilities. So I should be going Ravager, which allows me to place down like an axe or whatever that like spins and generates rage, rather than going into Bladestorm for 6 seconds where I'm not doing anything but Bladestorming, right? The My insight to saying like, oh, actually this is the way that I should approach the character. I should make this decision, even though it's not the optimal decision. Most warriors aren't going Ravager. Um, it like turns out to have the same effect, and that feeling, I have no other way to describe that feeling than just like an intense like existential satisfaction, right? That I was able to sort of like warp the mechanics of this game in my favor and come out with like not just an okay result, but a truly very good result, like a really spectacular result, more or less kind of on my own and with my own sort of like insights. So I wanted to describe that feeling. What is something that explains that feeling for you in 2020?
So this is tough because I know that feeling, right? Like that's like every time I played a off meta pick in League of Legends and won with it, right? Like that's exactly that feeling, right? Like
Hmm.
um I don't know if I have a super good moment for that this year, because there's just like not like in terms of that specific feeling of like kind of doing what you want instead of like what you're supposed to do. I just haven't had a ton of opportunity to play with that. Um, kind of this year, at least kind of in the games that I've played. But I will say the thing, a kind of thing that's like a very satisfying moment for me, was Enter the Gungeon. Was finally after. Let me check my time plan on this, because it's way too long for how long it took me to. But I have 122 hours in that game, and I finally beat it with the pilot for the first time. And that's just kind of like, I've been playing it over and over. It was for a long time my go-to kind of, my go-to kind of, listen to while playing, or listen to a podcast while playing a game type of game. Um, and it just worked. Like, it was just like so satisfying to kind of hit that moment and finally beat it out, and finally, I don't think I've played it since. And then, I thought at some point I would go back and play the other characters. Like, you know what, I'm good for now. And it's interesting because it was so tough for me to get to that point, right? Like, there have been other excellent roguelikes that I've played this year. Hades, gone viral. What's the other one? I played another one this year as well. Neon something, Neon.
Abyss.
Yeah, Neon Abyss. There we go. That's
Yep.
that's what it was. And they were all super fun, but they weren't as difficult. And so like, and I think like Hades, you're supposed to beat a bunch of times. Um, uh, Gone viral. I haven't played the latest stuff yet, and so when I was playing, it was still kind of it still wasn't super hard to get to the very end state. And
Yeah, you were in the beta, right?
yeah,
You haven't played early access.
I played a little. I've played a little bit of early access, but I haven't gotten to the end yet. Um, so I can't, but like beating the beta and beating Hades and the way Neon Abyss is set up is it's like a series of bosses. Um, uh, uh, have not felt the same. And it's this interesting. This is interesting thing where like this is true for Gone Viral. Like for Hades, the issue was that like you're meant to beat it a bunch of times. For Gone Viral, what I've played of it, and for Neon Abyss, when you, me winning felt much more like I happened upon the right lucky combination of things to make the game basically trivial. Whereas Gungeon never got that. Like there, I've had runs where like you know, um, things were easier, but I never got to the point where I thought like like this is trivial, and I just need to like walk into the room and press the button, which is kind of a very hard balance to strike with roguelikes. So I like you're all like that's kind of a thing you want to happen some percentage of the time is to get like a really kind of stellar run, but making it too easy, I think like undercuts the mechanics, so it's tough to do. So, I've talked about Enter the Gungeon a bunch on the podcast, but finally getting to the end and beating, shooting the past, is the basic plot of the game is you are going into a gun based dungeon and you are attempting to find the gun that can shoot the past, and then you have to do some stuff to make that work. And it involves going back to the characters like past right before they get locked in the dungeon and fixing what happened there. And so that was just super satisfying. So that's my nomination for that. I think we've got time for maybe one more. And
So here's an issue. So do we have people in the chat? People in chat, if you're there, do you want to ask us? Do you want to give us a category?
yeah. If you got something I'll shout out that I can't really put this in a category because like it's not gonna like you have used like so I just wanted to give a shout out to Foundry Virtual Tabletop as being the best piece of tabletop software that I've used. I feel like you've only used Roll20, so I don't want to be like, talk about Roll20.
I have never. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
only Roll20 for me.
yeah. But it's got a lot of cool tools that let you kind of like so Roll20 is a little bit too loose, I think. Um,
Mhm.
and I've also used Fantasy Grounds, which is nice but not quite there. And Astral Tabletop. Foundry Virtual Tabletop is the first game piece of software I've used that like really feels like it's almost like it's not quite there, but it's almost at that point where like essentially there's like no friction on the on the GM stuff. Not that I've done a lot of GMing stuff, but the stuff I've played on it really just kind of like it just kind of works.
Mhm.
And it's almost there. I think my personal belief is that no one no one's made a product to just do a game like a tabletop game like a particular one. Like no one's made the D&D client and no one's made the Pathfinder client because everybody wants to do the generalized tabletop client. And I think when somebody like at least for like the bigger games, like you should just do those, and that would
Yeah.
lead to the best thing. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, I do have some thought. Like I read a Twitter thread the other day where essentially a game designer, like a UX designer, was talking about Roll20, where he was talking about how amazed he was at the endless sort of functionality of Roll20. Like Roll20 just does it all. It has so much you can do. As soon as you start getting into scripts, right? Like it's just like insane. But it has some of like the worst UI and UX out there, kind of imaginable, which I think is very fair. I think Roll20 is maybe the most hostile platform I have just like ever used as a as a user. Which I mean, obviously they're a small startup. I can't give them too much flack for that, but I definitely understand why I guess it wouldn't be working out the way that you think.
Yeah,
Or like that your other experience would be better, is what I mean to say.
yeah. Uh, but like plus like there's just little things too, right? Like Roll20, like things that don't really matter, but like you might want, right? Like like nice dice rolling animations or whatever, right? Like I don't really need that, but it's a nice touch, right? Like this is like the corners on a MacBook or whatever, right? Like a thing that I don't really care about, but all else being equal, they can the little touches can make the difference. Um, yeah, uh, yeah. Oh. We've got a topic suggestion from Aluria. Uh, Biggest defied expectation for a game slash movie slash show, as in something you thought you'd like but didn't, or something you didn't expect to like but did. You have do you have an idea for this?
Man, this one's hard. I do have a couple thoughts in here. I'm trying to think what I would think. You know what? Okay, I will give it to The Boys, which I recently watched. I'm not going to spoil here, and I do think this is something we might want to cover on the cast a little bit later down the line. The way that The Boys gets talked about in the popular cultural consciousness is on the level of something like the Watchmen show, right? Which, I ultimately didn't like the place that the Watchmen show ended. I thought it really muddled its message with the ending and got a little bit too in its own head about some of these things. But ultimately, right, like it was a decent try. It was a good at bat. It's like a good base hit, not a home run, not a grand slam, right? But a good solid base hit of a show. Maybe I'll watch it again, see what I think about it in a couple of years. But ultimately, it's like you tried, kind of missed the landing, wasn't quite for me, but fair enough, sort of thing. Um, the Boys gets talked about in that level of show, right? In the same level of show that kind of, like that we would think of prestige TV being in, right? Better Call Saul is in there, Breaking Bad, The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, obviously. Though the ending marks that just makes that whole discussion very, very difficult. The Boys does not belong in that category. I was really expecting more from The Boys. I knew of the comic and I was very well acquainted with the comic in a general sense, but I never read it. And the thing that people had always said about the comic was like, "Oh, this is actually like a lot deeper and more complex than you think." The Boys is really not that deep. It really does not have that much on its mind. I told a friend the other day, do you remember the old like there's a like an internet meme called the Smurfs Lost episode where whatever the girl Smurf's name is,
Smurfette.
um where Smurfette says to Papa Smurf, can I lick your ass? And then they do like a whole song about it was just like, Papa Smurf, can I lick your ass? Yeah, lick my ass, bitch. And that's it. That's the whole thing over and over and over again. It was like on Newgrounds or like E-Bombs World or something like that. In middle school, I thought this was the pinnacle of comedy. And if you break down what that joke is, it's very simple. Here is a beloved, wholesome childhood thing. Let's make them do something heinous and filthy, essentially. The Boys is just that. It really is. It is that, but for Superman and the Justice League, basically. It's what if superheroes said fuck? What if superheroes killed guys? And it's just like, you know, in a world where there is legitimately really interesting and really kind of compelling sort of subversive materials for like the superhero shows, superhero universes, or whatever else, where you have stuff like Watchmen, um, which even though it doesn't stick the landing, at least it does have like a real point of view. As far as I can tell, The Boys really doesn't have much more on its mind than what if Superman was bad, was a real bad guy. He was bad guy, bad, you know, and that's okay. It's a very compelling show. I would even say it's a good show. I did have a good time watching it, but I had a good time watching it because I was compelled by its plot mechanics because I wanted to see where the story was going next. I was never ever interested in anything more deeper, like more deep than that, and I just don't think the show had anything deeper than that to offer. So that was a big letdown, I guess, and a big sort of defiance of my expectations based on how the overall world talks about the show and was engaging with the show. So that's what I would give that award to. What about you?
Okay, so this is a little different, but so this is gonna be about my fourth attempt to get into Final Fantasy 14, which I stuck with for a while, and
That's true.
and like so the thing I had thought to myself at the time was like, I'm gonna, a while ago I was like, maybe I shouldn't play WoW anymore. I'm gonna try and get into Final Fantasy 14. It's prettier. It's more recent. It's got a better story by all accounts. Uh, you know, And so I like the crafting a lot better in Final Fantasy 14 because there's something to it, right? Like, for all WoW is, it's got, I mean, there's nothing to the crafting mechanics really, right? Like, they're just kind of like, gather thing put together. Um, and so I played it for a while. I think the story is so I'm not gonna say the story is kind of better from like an all encompassing point, but like I think it's just better executed in a lot of ways, right? Like there's more of it. It's a more kind of driving thing. More of it's kind of told in kind of, I'm not gonna say like high production because some of them are just kind of like in engine cutscenes, but like the kind of the what happens with kind of the Sultana in the transition between uh, Realm Reborn and Heaven's Word, I thought was fantastic. Right, I really loved it. When it comes down to it, though, I don't like the rotations. Like, I just don't. Like, like I was like, I was hoping I would get into it with the gunner, but I don't like the way it feels. Even the bard, which I was playing beforehand, I was always kind of like, it was always kind of like, well, once I get the gunner, I'll like that. And it's just like, it doesn't feel nearly as good as WoW does. And that is so important in an MMO, right? Like when 90% of what you're doing is kind of like, playing your kind of key, like playing your keyboard, right? Like, hitting the buttons in rhythm and order. Like, it has to feel good. And it WoW, nothing can touch WoW. At least for tab targeted MMOs that I've played. Um, it's just it is amazing to me that like that makes the difference. I've like it's kind of depressing, honestly, because I came crawling back to WoW eventually, right? Like, and you know what? It feels fucking great to play, right?
I
Like
get that though. I absolutely do. I mean, even like I would stick up for the WoW story quite a lot, and I do think that it is like good or whatever. But I haven't even played the Final Fantasy story, and I'm just willing to take people at their words that it's better. I think the WoW story suffers for a lot of different reasons. Chief among them is sort of a spoiler culture. This is you know so many of us who are like hardcore WoW people get our news from data mined cinematics that go up on Wowhead 6 weeks before we unlock the quest and do all of the context to that cinematic. And we all sort of are constantly on that drip of what is the next. You're like, whoa, oh, this costume came out and this thing happened or whatever. That it's just like I find it hard to get sort of just into the world in that sort of way. And that's just like an endemic problem to the systemization of how they put shit up on the fucking PBR. It has nothing to do with this. Like, there are very talented writers who are doing great stuff on WoW, obviously. It just feels like it's constantly ruined because I read broadcast text that's like out of context that suggests that certain things, and when I hit those moments in game, they can just like fall very, fall very flat. I would highly recommend anyone listening to this and anyone out there ever try your very best not to listen to those fucking spoilers because it just really sucks. But yeah, I definitely know what you mean when it comes to like the rotation with WoW. I had this problem with Guild Wars 2, which, to be fair, I tried this long time ago and I never got very deep into it at all. Um, so this is really not a representative take, but it's just as a kind of mirror. Something that I really appreciate about WoW at its highest end is you are kind of encouraged to think in longer, more strategic stretches than not. So for instance, in one of the boss fights, Sludge Fist, he like slams into a pillar and he takes 100% extra damage for 10 seconds or something like that, right? And when you're playing WoW at its best level, you are reacting to those sorts of things and trying to filter that timing into the way that you are planning and playing your rotation, right? So for me, that like looks like, well, I'm gonna hold my big burst window, right? Conqueror's Banner, Avatar, Blade Sword, all this stuff, right? For when he does that, and I'm going to hope I get another version of that window 3 minutes from now, right? So if the fight lasts for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, right, I will get two full high cooldown windows, right? If the fight only lasts 3 minutes, then I'm actually fucking myself up because I could have an opening window and I could have a closing window if that makes sense. And those sorts of decisions, when you're making those sorts of high level decisions, when you're in a Mythic Plus dungeon, you're like, should I drop my banner now on this trash pack, or do I save it because the pack after this pack is the boss, and I know that it probably won't be up for the boss, and I want to have it on pull for the boss. Like those are the decisions that I find most tactically and sort of like strategically engaging, outside of just like the second to second sort of like rotational stuff. And I think that like that's where like WoW truly shines. And I really haven't seen very many games that sort of like rival that sort of like elongated. It's almost like an endurance thing, right? It is asking you to play at your best and make the best possible decisions over the course of a 5 minute or 30-minute window, 40-minute window if you're doing like mythics or something kind of along those lines, which I just find like very very engaging. Whereas something like League of Legends, right? Like League of Legends is highly engaging for bursts of times, like for 30 seconds, right? I'm incredibly on, but when I'm running back from base, like that's not super impactful. I don't know. That's my thoughts on that.
Yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely. Well, with that, I think we're gonna bring a. Thank you for that suggestion,
that was a great
Gloria.
question.
Yeah.
That was an absolutely amazing question.
But yeah, I think that'll bring an end to the Derpies. How were your past 2 weeks? I guess.
How were my past 2 weeks? Okay, well, so I obviously watched The Boys, which I talked about a little bit. Uh, really empty, but very compelling. I went to bed and I woke up and the first thing I did was I was like, I have to finish this show. I have to keep watching this show, which is a rare feeling for me. Even on shows that I find like very like good, like so. This also happened to me for Cobra Kai, which I thought was very good, and really compelling. That had a lot of like drama that got me super invested in what was kind of like coming next. Uh the Boys might be the best at that, at that feeling of just like I have to see what comes next. Um, so good show. Though I will say it was rough going from finishing The Sopranos, which is great by the way. Um, Everything people say about that ending is really interesting, and I love the Sopranos ending is like one of those famous endings. It's like really like
Yeah, I know the
controversial
ending.
or whatever. Yeah, um, and I just think it's really smart. It's really deep. There's like a lot of levels. I feel like we could have an entire podcast where we just talk about the ending and sort of like the different interpretations of what that ending means and how you can kind of like look at it and approach it and stuff like that. But going from The Sopranos, which is, very bleak TV, right? Like the Sopranos, I feel like is not quite a show about like straight ethics in the way that like Breaking Bad is. Like the Breaking Bad story is the descent story of like watch someone descend into evil. And in a certain sense, that's kind of what The Sopranos is. Like it is a show about evil in that same kind of like vein, but it is much more about like the compromises, the bargains, the deals with the devil that people strike over and over and over again, right? Where, you are watching people who are otherwise trying their best and trying to like do their best and like giving into their sort of like lesser impulses, their sort of their demons, right? And eventually, they each end up paying the price for it in their own very ways. Sometimes it's in these poetic ways, in these like narratively like satisfying ways. Sometimes it's kind of in off the wall sort of ways. Sometimes, characters are really used as kind of plot props, which I don't love, but it's okay. Um, and man, it is tough to watch that and then to watch The Boys, because The Boys is also very bleak. The Boys is more or less a show that kind of says like, yeah, there's no such thing as superheroes. We're all like selfish assholes at heart, and everyone's just lying and trying to like get ahead, which like, you know, I'm a comic book guy. I'm a superheroes guy. I do think that people are at their heart good, right? And trying their best. And even though like bad shit happens all the time. Bad shit happens when people have great intentions or whatever, right? Like I really balk at those incredibly sort of like cynical worldviews. And so both The Sopranos and The Boys had them, and I happened to just like watch them like really like back to back, and I was like legitimately sort of like feeling that depression. So I watched Yu-Gi-Oh! I started watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I was like in voice with people where we're watching where I was telling them I was watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And then I just started streaming Yu-Gi-Oh! And now we're all just watching Yu-Gi-Oh! Every night where we're like doing like world quests or whatever. We got through the whole first arc, which was super funny because like I'm obviously a very kind of storied card player. My friend Phalanor is a very storied card player. My friend Amelin used to work at a card shop administering like these tournaments and shit like that. So they are, a very experienced in all of this sort of thing. And so it's just like always fun to like watch Yu-Gi-Oh, which is built on more sort of, I guess I would call it like kind of like fundamentalist narrative drama where people are pulling rabbits out of the hat, right? And you're constantly explaining what you're doing. So it just doesn't look like a card tournament at all, but there's just like a certain aesthetic parody that is funny to people watching Yu-Gi-Oh and be like, man, if this, could you imagine this happening in a real tournament? So, you're playing you're playing a card game against the creator of the game, and he pulls out a card and he says, I designed this card just for this match. Like obviously that's like ridiculous, but man, it is just super
Man,
fun.
I would,
I
I would, I
also
would, I would love to see like a Magic tournament where Mark Rosewater comes up and it's like, "Fuck you," right? Like,
that's kind of what happened with like Pegasus, right? And it's just like, oh my god. And Yu-Gi-Oh constantly does this thing where the mechanics of the game are dictated by like logic in the real world, right? So for instance, Yugi faces Mako Tsunami, where he plays a full moon magic card, which causes a moon to spawn, which causes the tide to rise. And then Yugi destroys the full moon, which causes the tide to recede and like fuck over all of like Mako's. It's like, that's not in the fucking card text. You know what I mean? Like, the fact that like the Duel Monsters card game is technically speaking an interpretation of this ancient Egyptian shadow games or whatever, but you're playing cards with like these modern connotations, like Barrel Dragon, right? Did they have the idea for fucking robots in ancient Egypt? Did they have the idea of revolvers that you would put on a robot in order to shoot its guns in ancient Egypt? Obviously not. I don't know.
well, that's why it's a
It's
revolver
very
and not a
fun.
semi-automatic gun, right?
Yeah, exactly. They couldn't foresee, they couldn't foresee AK-47s. They can foresee Cyber Commando, who has like, a rocket launcher on his shoulder. Oh my god. So Yu-Gi-Oh has been an amazing kind of like chaser to those very like bleak shows, because it's dumb, but it's also very sincere and like heartfelt, right? You constantly have Kaiba, Mokuba, right? Like, you have to trust in the heart of the cards. The spirit of friendship saves Yugi's day. It's like good old fashioned shonen anime wholesomeness, and I'm
Not only
couldn't be
that, but you're
happier.
you're you're also watching the 4 kids version, right? Like, I don't think there was another version, so you must be right. Like, you're not like watching in the original Japanese or whatever. So there's all that
Nope, we are
funness.
watching the 4 Kids version with
Yeah.
all of the 4 Kids edits, like where Bandit Keith clearly is holding a gun to Pegasus's head, but they just edit the gun out, so he's doing this. Where he's like, I mean, people who are listening can't see. He's holding nothing to Pegasus's head. Or sometimes they will like very crudely like draw in replacements. There's another part where Pegasus sends some goons to go like fuck with Seto Kaiba or whatever, and you can tell they clearly have guns, but 4 Kids have like drawn over it, so it looks like they're just pointing at him. Like, oh, anyway, that's my life. What have you been up to? Tell me
Yeah.
how things are going.
So if you recall, back when over Thanksgiving, I watched the Ocean's 11 or the Ocean series. So with my family, and we decided to do something similar. We split it a little bit. First, we went the George Clooney route, and we watched Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is a really good movie. A little bit of magical realism. Also stars the guy who plays the mirror face cop in
Tim
Watchmen.
Blake Nelson, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Who plays what
this
is it, Looking Glass?
yeah. That's his name.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, and like one of the 3 dudes in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which you know, the opening title says like based on the Odyssey, which is like very loosely based on the Odyssey, I guess. Like there are like moments, but like I don't know. I thought it's a lot of fun to watch. I really like the Coen brothers. Like kind of like their like semi goofy magical realism. Like at least the movies in that kind of genre, like Hail Caesar. I need to go back and watch more of their stuff. I never ended up watching Ballad of Buster Scroggins or whatever, which I think they did some of them or something.
That is also Tim Blake Nelson. I have not watched it either, but I know that Tim Blake Nelson is like
Mm,
the guy. I need to watch that. I think is Buster Scruggs in that
that
movie.
makes sense.
I love "Oh Brother Where Art Thou," specifically the music. There was a while where my family got super into that soundtrack, and it was just like the CD that was in the car whenever we were driving someplace. Um, and the funny thing was is that like everybody loved the soundtrack, but we all had favorite songs. Like my favorite song was the Big Rock Candy Mountains, the one about, if you're like the tramps who are um hobos and homeless or whatever, talking about like what their dream world would be. Um yeah, man, I love that movie. That movie's
Yeah,
great.
it's a great movie. Um, yeah, no, there's just so much fun there. The other movie I watched was Logan Lucky. Are you familiar with Logan Lucky?
I have seen Logan Lucky, and Logan Lucky is also great.
So we start watching it, and we're like, and it's like, from like we were looking at it, it's like, wait, this is Steven Soderbergh, right? Like, which
Mhm.
is the connection, right? So it's like we start watching, it's like, oh, this will be fun. It's like I look up and like about like 30 minutes, and my brother and I look at each other like, this is just like redneck Ocean's 11, right?
That is exactly what it is.
Only for later in the movie does someone say they're calling it Ocean 711, right? Like
Yep.
like that's a line in the movie. Like, he knows what he's doing, right? But like I really enjoyed it just because, like, besides, Adam Driver being fantastic and, all of that kind of stuff. Like, whereas Ocean's 11 wants to be like serious most of the time, because it's supposed to be like like some of the funny moments in Ocean's 11, 12, 13 kind of like fall flat because you're expecting the movie's got like a slightly more serious tone. It's like kind of
Mhm.
like the funny parts are like not quite coherent, or not coherent. Coherent's the wrong word, but they're not quite copacetic with the rest of the movie. Logan Lucky doesn't pretend, right? Like, it's about a bunch of rednecks trying to pull off an Ocean's 11 style plan, so you can have the funny moments and have it just work with the tone of the movie. And it's a
Yep.
lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, Daniel Craig has a great character. I also just love Channing Tatum in that movie.
Yeah.
I think I'm a huge lover of Steven Soderbergh for two movies that I talk about all the time, but I'm not sure I talk about them on the cast. Do you know my like long and deep and throbbing love for Magic Mike and Magic
You've
Mike
mentioned,
XXL?
yeah.
I love those two movies, and they're both well. Okay. Technically, um, Magic Mike XSL is not directed by Steven Soderbergh. He is the DP on that. He swapped with his typical DP for the sequel to Magic Mike, where he was the DP and his DP was the director. But they're both Steven Soderbergh movies, right? Like, where he's kind of the principal. Steven Soderbergh is that guy. He can get whatever he wants done, right? He just has the name in Hollywood. Anybody he wants any amount of money, he can get it, kind of thing. And everybody wants to work with him because apparently he's a really nice guy. Um, and I just love Channing Tatum and him. They are so great. One of the things I loved about Logan Lucky was it was coming out because this was a couple of years ago by now, but it was coming out right
2017,
in the
yep.
middle of like all of these like Hillbilly Elegy wasn't out, but like that archetype of movie, which is like, all of the New York Times interviews with like diners in Western Georgia who really love Donald Trump and they hate the coastal elites or whatever, and talking about kind of like, oh, like the white working class people or whatever. I hated all of those things, right?
So that
And
is about the right time for the Hillbilly Elegy book.
okay, yeah,
Yeah.
it is that sort of genre of like, oh, we may vote for, Republicans and all of these other things, but we're really just having a tough time, and people we're dying out because of, I don't know, Rust Belt, whatever. And I just like don't have a lot of patience for that sort of kind of like narrative. And it was like it just felt like it was everywhere, like movies, TV, that kind of stuff. Or I'm sorry, Logan Lucky came out at that time when I'm like primed to just be like, another one of these fucking movies that want me to like or whatever. And I was instantly like into these characters and who they are, and they are the exact characters that are also all over the other place, like these other places. But there's just like something about the writing and the acting that I just like, I don't know. I sincerely care about Channing Tatum and his daughter in that movie, right? In a way that I bristle at some of these other sorts of kind of, hokier, more wholesome kinds of excuse me, attempts at that kind of genre, I guess.
Yeah, no, I get that. Funnily enough, I read Hillbilly Elegy a couple of years ago. That's not like really here nor there. It's in because JD Vance is from West Virginia, I believe.
Yeah,
Or
it's
he,
like autobiographical or whatever it is.
yeah, it's semi autobiographical. Because
Mhm.
he's like the guy that escaped that, right? Like,
Yeah.
and he, if I remember correctly, he is also kind of like changed like it's not important. I don't want to go into like the personal politics of JD Vance, but
I
it's
do need to. I need to watch the movie. Maybe we can talk about this in like the back half because I do want to watch the movie. It's like a Ron Howard movie. People have been talking about it, and so it's like been on my list to
yeah.
watch the movie adaptation, which is apparently not of not great, but we'll see.
Also, is it like because like the book's like a like a it's not quite a political treatise, but it's like him explaining why things are this way, right? It's not like a
Yeah.
narrative, right? So
Mhm.
like is and I think the movie's like a narrative, right? Like
Yeah, like I think it does actually sort of moment to moment explain this stuff. I don't know. I'm interested in it,
okay,
even though
yeah,
I'm sort of dreading it. Because whatever.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Fair enough. Um, yeah. Uh, so that's basically the big stuff I did with my week. Besides, trying or end up playing stupid amounts of WoW because, like, that's the. Funnily enough, that's one of the few games that can run on my laptop because my laptop isn't a
Nice.
gaming machine. So
You know what's funny is WoW has been running pretty poorly on my machine. Because I
really,
think Nvidia fucked up the drivers.
uh,
I immediately picked up a driver, and one of the new things they added in Shadowlands was like ray tracing, and ever since my machine has been running WoW. Technically pretty fine, but I get this weird flickering effect, which I think is a lighting thing, where like the light, it's like it's in darkness, but then it's like illuminated, and it just
that's a
flickers over and
DX12
over
thing.
again.
That's a DX12
Oh, it
thing.
is?
I'm almost because
Interesting.
I have the same I have a similar problem. So it's like the textures flicker on and off, and like when it's brighter than the other. I think
Yeah,
that yeah, I googled that and it said switch it to DX11. I didn't. It went away. So
interesting. I did not know that. I wonder how we'll figure that out. How
yeah,
have you been enjoying your World of Warcraft experience? How deep have you gotten? We were talking about Torghast earlier.
yeah. So yeah, Torghast has been fun. But like I am approaching the point where it's kind of like, you know, I should probably like pull myself back a little bit from it. Not because it's not fun, but like I am making myself not have fun because it's like, well, I have to get on and get all the anima that way I can be, and do all do all of everything. It's like if I just kind of did the big things, um I wouldn't be as like drained by it, I guess. But like, it's kind of like,
Hmm.
well, there's anima to get, so there's anima to get, right? So like, because I was on that computer, I didn't want to do anything super hardcore, so I didn't really push anything. I just kind of did basic stuff. Um, the world quests are a little too easy for my taste. Like that thing I was talking about last time. We talked about how like it feels a lot easier to die. Is slowly gone away as like I've gotten better gear and whatnot. So there's
Yeah.
that, which is kind of expected, I guess. But it's a little kind of disappointing. A little disappointing in that like there's like not a lot of challenge, kind of like the base level stuff to do anymore. But like that's just the way the game goes.
Yeah, I
Uh,
remember there was a time where world mobs scaled with you, like as you got more gear, but people really hated that, so they removed it. I
oh
think
yeah,
this was in Legion, right? Um,
yeah. I think that's probably worse. I think the way it wants to be maybe is like stuff that you just can't do until like I know that like they probably don't want to lock stuff behind stuff, but it's like you know like the closest I get to this is like things that I wasn't able to solo before that I can solo now. Uh, what other kind of stuff is there to say about my experiences in
yeah, I
WoW?
definitely I think that world quests and callings are things that people will grow out of. Like I like world quests to be honest. Just as like it's busy work in a sort of sense to keep my like hands and mind focused on a thing while I'm also like whatever watching Yu-Gi-Oh on my other screen sort of thing. But like there are no world quest upgrades left for me on Baron. The callings are also not super worth it. I don't think outside of just rep at this point. Um, which is sort of interesting. One of the things that was nice about Battle for Azeroth and Legion is that like as you got these like emissary chests or whatever, you could like slowly gear yourself up to sort of like raid level, but they've pared that back. You don't get that level of gear out of world quests anymore. Though there are a couple of world quest upgrades in like the renown tree, so maybe as you do like the stories of like renown or whatever, that is better. Um, but like I think at a certain point like that stuff just kind of becomes very secondary, and it's expected that like, okay, you have graduated on this character, you have graduated sort of world quests, you probably aren't going to do many more of that of like world questing. So this is when you go into, right, like Mythic Plus is when you go into raiding. This is when
Yeah.
you get into like the big high end group content kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I buy that.
Have you been doing like Raid Finder or anything kind of along those
Yeah, I
lines?
mean, I did. There's one wing of Raid Finder open, so I did that. But as always, Raid Finder isn't super compelling, just because like it's CC, right? Like there's not a
Yeah.
lot to do. Um, uh, it's I think like it's fine, right? It's fine. Not a lot that I'm excited about. Not a lot that I'm excited about doing on my own, I guess at this point, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, but um,
It kind of feels like League of Legends a little bit in that way, where it's like at a certain point, solo queue just is going to be aggravating and not
yeah,
super fun, and you
yeah,
you need to like find a group kind of thing. Something that we
absolutely.
did over the weekend actually that was interesting was we did time walking Ulduar, because they've added a bunch of raids. So like with time walking weeks, right? You do the time walking dungeons and you get a piece of like raid gear or whatever. I kind of hate those dungeons. I've seen them enough times that they're sort of like a slog and not incredibly fun for me. But I pugged into. I was like, Time Walking Ulduar releases raid level loot at like old loot levels, right? Right now, loot will drop at about 3 pieces per. They cut raid drops in half, right? It used to be 5 pieces per 20, now it's 3 pieces per 20 people, essentially, right? Ulduar does not do that. It scales, right? So we went in there with 15 people, we were getting 4 or 5 drops per boss. And the bosses are like not super tough. They're about as hard as like a raid finder boss would be. But the thing that I found really funny was that when you're doing time walking content, you can equip all this old shit, right? I can equip my Legion legendaries, though they don't have their effects anymore. They just have stats. You can equip uh, the Heart of Azeroth and your old Azerite gear. You can equip like the legendary cloak from Pandaria or the legendary ring from Draenor, right? And all that stuff like functions and is like really good and really like powerful. And so when I went in on Baron, I was pulling not quite the same. I was about half the level of DPS, but I was just like blowing everybody else out of the water because it all scales down. And so just as like an experiment in like dumb, fun, layering all of these systems that are not supposed to be layered on top of one another, I had a really great time doing time walking Ulduar. Also, Ulduar is just like a really fun raid. One of the interesting things about it is like doing the Yogg Saron fight really is just like N'Zoth 1.0. Or like the N'Zoth fight is sort of like an update of the of sort of like the typical sort of like old con encounters. I've always really loved the N'Zoth fight. People really hated it, but I think that's just because BFA bad circle jerks reasons. And like my thing was I always really liked that it plays on sanity and it's like attacking your mind, but you are also attacking like literally N'Zoth's brain. You are going into his head and attacking his mind, which is like a neat reversal. And like that's just cool. That's like a neat sort of, I don't know, aesthetic, I guess, to the setup of a raid encounter or whatever. But like so many of the mechanics I had completely forgotten about were these mechanics that we saw in Cthulhu and also in Yogg Saron's boss fight in Ulduar, right? Where you're going into these like alternate phases, where in the Yogg Saron fight you're looking at the future, you're looking at like you're going into the future, going into like these past. You're going into Stormwind Keep, you're going into Icecrown Citadel or whatever. In the N'Zoth fight, you are being attacked by Azshara and Deathwing, who are like these two people that N'Zoth corrupted and like used against you when you're going into like that secondary like mind phase, the tentacles and stuff like that. I don't know. It's just very cool. I like that. I like that experience a lot. I really enjoyed Time Walking Ulduar. And in a couple of weeks, I think it's Time Walking Firelands, which I'm also interested in seeing if we can like get a group together and doing. I have a feeling that Firelands is going to be more complex than that though. Like one of the things, we always talk about getting better over time. One of the things we have gotten better at over time is designing boss encounters to not just be sort of tank and spanks. Most of the Ulduar fights were functionally just tank and spank fights, because like the mechanics are things that are so brain dead. It's just like when ads spawn, kill them. That's it. Like that's the mechanic of the
Yeah.
fight, right? And that worked in, I guess that worked in Wrath of the Lich King, but now we just sort of expect something a little more complicated than that. I do remember that Cataclysm had more complex raid mechanics in the Firelands raid than that. And so I guess I'm just interested to see
Yeah.
what it has to offer. I also hope that they add more time walking in the future. I would love to do time walking, Mists, Draenor, Legion raids to see, as that stuff gets added,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
to see what it's like.
Makes sense. No, absolutely. Yeah. Uh, I've only ever done most of those things in kind of like the rear view mirror, right? Like as like kind of like solo things I did for fun. Like I did the end of Pandaria, and but yeah, no,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
all right, well, I think we're at the end of it then, unless you had anything else you wanted to talk about.
I got nothing else to talk about.
All right. Well, in that case, if you'd like to tell us what your favorite games are, or talk about any of the other things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at somedirtsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@somedirtsplaygames.com. Follow us or rate and review us on iTunes. Follow us on Twitch, where you can see these live now. Follow us on YouTube, where you can watch the recordings. Donate to us on Patreon if you feel like it. Don't feel obligated, though. That's everything I have. Buddy, you have anything you want to promote before we get out of here?
I have nothing else I'm looking to promote.
Well, in that case, until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.